Welcome to Responsible AI, the podcast for the AI Forum. Here on the podcast, we engage in critical dialogue with legal minds and tech experts on AI's legal and societal impacts. We talk to professionals in cybersecurity, law, and technology, offering deep dives into public policy and best practices. Responsible AI is hosted by Alex Albin, director of the AI Forum, and me, your producer, Rebecca Staffel. You can learn more at our website, theaiforum.org. We're talking today with Michael Cockrill, Chief Technical Officer for the Altius Institute for Biomedical Sciences. Previous to joining Altius in 2017, Michael served as the Chief Information Officer for the state of Washington and Director of Washington Technology Solutions, where he was responsible for creating the State Office of Cybersecurity and the Office of Privacy and Data Protection. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Michael, it's great to see you again, and really looking forward to your participation. We appreciate you being on the podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
We have a question for you. You have experience in the private sector, in the public sector, in the research sector, and probably are you pretty uniquely positioned to understand how a new technology comes on the scene and changes everything. And the question is AI such a technology? And how do you see it really making a big impact in the work that Altius is doing with respect to medical research?
I think there's no question that AI is one of those seminal changes in the way people work. It will have as much impact as the internet did 15 years ago. And give you some concrete examples in my day-to-day life. First experiment that I did with AI was I changed my search engine to ChatGPT. I don't use Google anymore. And when your world is viewed through how quickly and accurately can you find information, changing your technology is a big change. And AI is really comprehensive. If you look across Altius, just the way we search has changed. One of the most jaw-dropping examples I have seen recently is Google came out with a product called Notebook LLM. And I won't go over all the details, but I do research now by gathering up 5 or 10 different URLs and feeding it to Notebook LLM, and then having it basically generate a knowledge base that I can ask questions for. That is a completely different way of integrating with data.
If we're hearing what you're saying correctly and taking it to a logical extreme, AI then is going to speed up medical research and speed up results. Is that an accurate conclusion to reach?
It absolutely is. And I'll give you another concrete example of that. What we do at Altius is we research the way genes interact with each other. And we're not using we actually are using a large language model to do that. But more importantly, I think we're using a technology people refer to as machine learning. So what we end up doing is taking some tissue, we perturb some genes, we use 2 different mechanisms to analyze the results. One of them is sequencing, and the other one is super high resolution microscopy, where we create 3-dimensional models of the nucleus of a cell. And the ultimate goal is to bounce these 2 data sets off each other so that we can create a model that will anticipate when you perturb a particular set of genes, the reaction to the rest of the cell. To a biologist, what I just explained was you can do drug research in silico. We are not very far away from AI changing the way pharmaceutical companies do drug research, making it way faster, way less expensive, way more efficient. And it's happening today.
So, Michael, if we can ask one follow-on to this theme here, I imagine you work with a lot of really bright PhDs and people who have been trying to cure cancer for many years. Is this going to be the disruptive technology that everyone has promised? We've heard of things like the protein folding problem being addressed, and just sort of we hear so many scary things about AI. Is this an example where this technology is shining right now?
Almost. We're on the verge of it. In the hardcore research world, we have not gotten over the hallucination problem. My favorite story is my boss looked up some details in a paper that he wrote, and the LLM came back with a whole brand new paper. Most of the same kind of research, most of the same type of people that would have been written a paper like this, but it just made up results that were not true. So, I like that story because it goes, all right, well, if this weren't John who didn't know what the result should be, it would have directed them to the right place, the right area, but it wouldn't have given them the right answer. So we're kind of two steps away. We got the hallucination problem, and I think this is a really critical thing that's true about AI across many industries. In the medical field, a lot of the most core basic data, some of the things that people have been researching for 100 years, where doctors would do super detailed research and write them down in big tomes full of detailed insight, that data is not digitized. 2 layers, 3 layers away from the core data is digitized, but the basic core stuff is not actually digital yet. One of the things that has to happen in medical research is we have to digitize all the different time points where people came to conclusions that are correct to be able to have it do what we all want to do, which is make prognostications about the diagnosis or where genes might be perturbed, et cetera. And without that data in digital form, that's just another big hurdle that has to happen. And I think
How's
that that's
how's
true
that gonna
across a lot.
happen?
That, you know what? If I were going to invest in something, it would be in a machine that turns the pages for very complicated books. My boss has a library. He has third generation researcher. He has a giant library full of that data, but we can't digitize it because of the form factors of the books.
For
It's
real, so
very
that's really they don't exist in digital form right now, it's not like there's a tape drive somewhere.
In some cases, that is true because the books are so old. In some cases, it is true because of copyright issues.
It's sort of an OCR issue with respect to how do you ingest all this new material. We're talking with Michael Cockrill, who is the CTO at Altius Institute, which is a medical research institute based in Seattle, Washington. Michael, outside of Altius, what do you see as the big news and excitement around AI in the medical industry in general?
In the medical industry in general, or I think the diagnostics, I think the big hope of AI is being able to get the kind of top 30 or 40% of the right diagnosis by a patient being able to describe their own medical history, or kind of the combination of a patient describing symptoms and the fact that a significant portion of patients' medical histories are captured electronically right now. So when that data gets freed up, that that very expensive and slow and frustrating process of diagnosis has some hope of being solved.
Michael, we can switch gears for a sec because I want to touch on your career in the public service. When you were the CIO for the state of Washington, you were an innovator. You changed the way technology was used in the state in the service of better government, especially in areas such as cybersecurity and in privacy. When you look back on what government is doing now with new technology and especially AI, do you see opportunities for not just state government, but also any kind of local government to be really improving the way they're delivering services to the residents of their communities?
Without a doubt, and we're already seeing some of that. I segment that problem into two categories. One of them is how can government provide better services to their constituents? And the other is how can they be more efficient internally? Arguably, the best example of how they can do it to their constituents, to prep for this meeting, I went and looked it up. If you wanted to start a restaurant in the city of Seattle that served alcohol, it would take 19 different licenses from 17 different organizations. I spent an enormous amount of taxpayers' time and money trying to solve that problem. I got a better result by asking ChatGPT 25 minutes before this conversation than what we were able to do. And I think what that demonstrates is that the currency of government is information. The problem is breaking down the silos of that information and then being able to find across multiple silos the related data. And that is what LLMs in particular are extraordinary at.
Michael, one of the things I think you also taught me when I was your colleague in state government was we have to speak the language of our constituents. And in the olden days, the language was they come in and look for a paper in a file and you deliver it to them. That then changed when things became electronic. Do you see new problems now with a new generation of people who are going to actually expect government to be smart and be using AI tools when they visit and say, I need this information or I need this problem solved?
Yes, and I think that's a great thing. Government, like anybody, like every other industry, gets driven by their customers. And when their customers demand that those types of problems can be solved easily, and the the relatively slow machinery of government catches up fairly quickly, because at the end of the day it all comes down to what is the legislature willing to spend money on. And when citizens are saying, why is this so hard, and I can point to a solution for it, get on it, government. The machinery for that actually is pretty quick. If I were still the CIO, I would be doing two things. I would be putting forward a bill that says every agency must spend a certain amount of its IT budget in AI research, and I would create a central agency that becomes a resource for every one of those agencies to be able to both be more efficient internally and do things like get the data out to their constituents better and faster.
That's a really interesting idea. And government needs to modernize, or people are just going to conclude that government isn't there to serve them. And that would be a shame given the technology that is available now to make things more efficient in the way we deliver services.
So if every division, let's say, has their own AI resources, what are those large language models? How are they? I'm still thinking about what you talked about in terms of diagnosis and all of these books that aren't even digitized. How does that show up in government, and how's that going to work for all those divisions? What do they need to do?
Well, first of all, as I mentioned before, the currency of government is information. Part of the problem with that is that because it's currency, because information really drives policy and money and business and commerce, et cetera, it's also regulated a bunch. The biggest issue between agencies sharing information is regulation. And so, one of the things that would need to happen is you'd have to take all the regulation about all of the agencies and put it into an LLM and say, what of this can we get rid of to make it easier to be able to, for example, have one place that a small business could go to where they could see the status of all of their interactions with the state of Washington. That is 9 different agencies. And the biggest issue is that those 9 agencies don't allow by law to share all the information between them for privacy reasons and security reasons and all good and just reasons if you take them one at a time. What an LLM would do is give you the ability to take all of that, integrate it so that intelligent people could look and say, every one of those problems made sense then. What makes sense now? How do we simplify all that crap so that we can share information that we should and solve people's problems faster and cheaper? But right now, it's way more complicated than a human being could understand.
Michael, that strikes me as really putting your finger on an important government problem that no one is really thinking of solving. We do have some new leadership in Olympia, and I guess the new administration could say they want to, utilize AI to make government more efficient, but then they're going to run into this silo problem with respect to data. I'm just flagging it here because it's really an important issue for policymakers and for civil liberties people to start thinking about. We want government to solve problems, but to do that, government is going to need to be smarter about data and using data to help people.
Alex, just one other thing about that. I use the word, when I say data is the currency of government, I'm picking that word very advisedly. Internally, that's the way people think about it. That's their money. And they protect it that way and they regulate it that way. And it's a useful thing to be aware of as you're trying to address that problem both from inside and outside of government, that those public servants are protective of their data. So it's both a policy issue and it's a cultural issue.
Now, if I'm remembering correctly, you were right about cloud computing. You were right about the Internet of Things. You're right about mobile data. So, putting on your, wise man hat again, what are you going to be right about in the next 10 years? What's the next thing we should be looking at in terms of a fundamental new technology, or is it really AI, and we're just in that universe for a while?
Well, I think AI is a tool that will accelerate the generation of much more interesting and new technologies like robotics, and both the way people think about like how do external machines move around in the physical world are going to make a significant difference in the economy, and less significant, but definitely a real difference in just the way that we live in our own homes and spaces, etc. But the other one it doesn't have a clear name exactly, except really the field's called Bionics. The way AI will come and build things that either augment your senses or integrate into your body in one way or another, from a biological perspective, disease perspective, etc. But even increasing your eyesight or making you hear better and easier. Years ago, there was a new technology people didn't even consider. They called it in-ear technology. We call it AirPods now. But some of that technology, if you've used them recently, it does noise canceling. But more scarily, in my mind, you can actually have it augment voices in particular areas of a room. So all of the privacy law is based on this idea of a reasonable expectation of privacy. Well, when you can physically augment your senses, what does that mean to privacy? And I think that, those kind of technology questions where basic things that are so fundamental, movement, interaction with the physical world, your own senses, when those change, they make fundamental societal changes.
It's also a very good example of how the changes in technology will actually change the law. Because if it's a reasonable expectation, what was reasonable 10 years ago with respect to, let's say, surveillance, might not be reasonable now because everyone has adopted like thermal imaging or ways of surveilling people. And this comes from a pretty well known court opinion that Justice Scalia wrote in a case called Kylo versus United States, not to get too law techy on us, but it means that the law needs to adjust to the way technology is used as people adjust their expectations about how it is going to be used in the real world. I think that's a really important insight. One other area that I know that you've been doing some research in, Michael, is supercomputing or quantum computing. And I know you've had some thoughts about both on the privacy side, but maybe also on other implications of what it's going to mean when we do eventually bring quantum computing into the real world.
Yeah, I think that there are kind of two big categories of AI, particularly as it relates to privacy and security. In the near future, what I would say is the idea of phishing is going to become a big life changer for people, both individuals and how they protect their own information, but also small and large companies. Because phishing is becoming so much easier and so much more multimodal. Today, most people in their cybersecurity training basically say, here's a way you can tell in your email about whether someone's going to phish. I've already seen examples of where somebody has gone, captured a lecture by a CEO, built a bot that can call the controller and have a real-time interface between the CEO's voice and the controller. So that's happening today. So you have to ask yourself, okay, now it's not going to be cybersecurity that we're focused on. It's going to be counterintelligence. Before I release money, I have to say the code word to my controller, not just have the right signature and all the downstream ramifications. I think that that's happening today. The more fantastical, the scarier one is, as you mentioned, Alex, quantum. And AI is driving the acceleration of the fundamental understanding of quantum physics that it takes to build a quantum computer. And we've seen Microsoft and Google and some governmental agencies write major papers anyway, whether they fully made those moves forward or not, just in the last couple months. And the big scary thing there is the types of problems that quantum computing is capable of solving includes breaking encryption. And encryption is fundamental to how we communicate, how we do banking, how we do retail. It underpins the fabric of commerce and the economy, and more importantly, national defense.
Well, when we drill down on that a little bit, and it gets pretty scary pretty quickly, because everyone has always had a perspective that quantum computing's going to get here eventually, but it's 20 years away. I've been hearing that for 40 years.
Right.
But now, has that really changed? Do you think AI has actually sped up this timetable for quantum? Because that means we should be studying the problems now in order to react to them when a new reality hits us.
It's hard to tell how much of that is artificial intelligence and how much of those steps forward are just human brilliance, but it is undeniable. I mean, there's existent proofs out there. There are the quantum computers that are way further along than people thought they were going to be 5 years ago. And the papers I was referring to are directly related to the next two or three unknown problems that need to be solved to be able to add orders of magnitude to it. So, it's the answer is yes, and it's absolutely provable.
And
It's not an opinion.
this is an example, if I state the obvious, where national funding is really important to major research universities if the United States is going to continue to play a leadership role, because China and other countries are not going to slow down their quest for quantum computing. And I'll just give you the softball. Do you think that we're doing the right things at the moment to protect our lead in computer science, at least when it comes to research?
Well, I mean the obvious answer to that question is no, we're not, certainly not at an academic level, certainly not at a national research investment level. But the other answer, the potential goodness, is it depends on who the we are. One of the upsides of having trillion-dollar companies that are multinational organizations that are where their fundamental view has to be looking way forward is that they are driving research in quantum, and most of that is happening in the US.
So we're talking companies such as Google, Microsoft, Anthropic, OpenAI.
All those, yes, and when I say most, I mean it's sort of 60+%. There's a lot of competition going on in Europe, and that are publicly known. And the scary thing, as you pointed out, is we don't know what's happening in China, really. And I mean, not to get too political, but if all you cared about was quantum computing, the Ukrainian war was the best thing that ever happened to us.
We'll tease that out for a second.
Russia is a research power, a powerhouse in almost everything they do. They were one of the big leaders in quantum computing. And right now, I mean, what I read recently was, I'm not going to quote the numbers because I'll get them wrong. Some really significant part of their GDP is going to their war effort, and it is coming from their research efforts.
I think I read something like 30% of their GDP, which is extraordinary. And the war also is bringing into focus the fact that computational analysis is driving the events on the battlefield. And it is leading to this very asynchronous battlefield where a $10,000 drone takes out a $100 million airplane.
Yeah.
That has to be actually changing the game theory of war quite a bit in a way that everybody, whether they're involved in this war or not, has to be watching very carefully.
Yeah. Guerrilla wars in cyberspace.
So, Rebecca, bring us out of the battlefield for a second, back into the safe confines of
Of
other
life.
issues.
Well, I'm just curious, Michael, because Alex has you as a future caster. What questions are we going to be asking about AI in 18 months? You don't have to have answers, just the questions.
I think arguably the biggest question, particularly in that time frame, is how do we most expertly and appropriately educate our children using AI? The one of the realities that I believe is happening, we're standing on a slippery slope that we've been on for a long time in terms of education not being about teaching people facts. It used to be when I was growing up, a lot of what you were educated on is facts. And then as you got more mature, the goal was how do you take those facts and integrate them into something insightful as quickly as possible? Well, how does education change when knowing the facts is not part of that calculus anymore? And in the current versions of AI, a lot of the analysis of those facts can be automated. So how do we use that technology to train young minds and different people, et cetera, including protecting our technology lead and national, education is the silver bullet about everything. So, the questions that many people are asking and everybody should be asking is, what does AI mean to education? Because that ends up being the root of the future.
You do have an opportunity because I know you have college age children who are using AI. And are there any learnings that you could share with our audience about the good uses of AI in their educational careers, and then also the dangers of using AI at a college educational level?
Well, the dangers are pretty well. It's a pretty well worn path. But everybody's concerned about plagiarism and basically having a large language model write a paper for you. But I don't think that that's a particularly interesting conversation because I can get an LLM to write a paper for me, and I can also get an LLM to detect when an LLM wrote the paper for me. I mean, there's always going to be that back and forth technology will equalize. The relevant thing is how can you use algorithmic and programmatic ways to teach people to come up with novel thoughts? And that becomes the problem of education in the near future because facts aren't going to be all that relevant. I can just get them from my phone. Initial analysis of those facts isn't going to be all that relevant, although, exactly what facts do you use? There's that gets into a whole nother topic, but you can make an argument that says there is an ability for a machine to analyze the facts. The question is, how do we train people to come up with novel things, the things that a computer can't figure out because it integrates multiple disciplines or comes from societal interaction or things that you just can't digitize. And I think that that's the challenge of education in the future. Uh, right after we can feed our kids lunch, there's a few more important problems to solve. But for this topic, like how do we create novel ideas out of factual information becomes a big challenge.
I think that's a great thing to be thinking about. How do we bring the human intelligence into partnership with the artificial intelligence? Which leads us to our classic question here, Michael. What does responsible AI mean when you think about that phrase?
Yeah, that is a tough one. I think right now, when to be honest, as I was prepping for this, I did what I always do. I went and asked ChatGPT what are the topics in responsible AI. And it came up with very similar to the ones that experts would all come up with: bias and fairness and transparency, accountability, privacy, et cetera. But I think that they're fairly academic because they're a little bit like solving yesterday's problems. And I acknowledge you have to continue to do that because every yesterday's problems will be a problem of tomorrow as well. But like those topics came up from people with big brains and thoughtful ideas 2 years ago. The relevant thing is where you gotta skate to where the puck is going, and I don't know what the relevant parts will be 2 or 3 or 4 years from now. I know it's gonna be really different from the way it is today. The categories are likely to be the same, but, as I thought about that word responsible AI, the thing that just kept coming back to me is that in the near term, I believe that it's not the right time to legislate. What it is the right time to do is protect against the downside. So I think the two biggest problems in AI, and they fit into that category of responsible AI, are deep fakes and the fact that the inherent in the technologies that exist today, it will never go away that these technologies hallucinate. It is just, some of them are getting better and better at not hallucinating, but the ones that are good at not hallucinating aren't very good at analysis.
What do you think of a perspective of, I believe it's the former CEO of IBM, Ginny Rometty, who said, AI will not replace humans, but those who use AI will replace those who don't.
I would agree with every word of that. My kids make fun of me all the time whenever they ask me a question. I'm like, go ask ChatGPT. I've got nothing novel to say.
Right, right. Well, are there things on the horizon that you'd like to share with us in the last few minutes?
I think the thing, and it goes right back to the responsible AI, the thing that is both scares me and inspires me to think, life's good is the idea of, strangely enough, regulation, and I think policy is just a far better word. The challenge of rational policy that protects against the downside, enables all the potential of the upside. Like, I think the biggest societal problem is both how do you create that policy as a fusion of the technology and the actual human beings in the society that uses it? And then, just from the experience of having worked as a public servant, even if you could come up with good policy, how do you ever get it passed and funded? And what do we give up because we have good policy for AI? Policy is a zero sum game. If we spend time there, what are we giving up? Those are just fascinating questions.
Well, we need thoughtful people to make the case for wise use of AI in government and outside of government. In order to make these thoughtful people, we have to have educational podcasts and books and people having thoughtful discussions about these topics so that it becomes the topic of government. And to that end, I really do appreciate your visiting with us in this podcast, sharing your perspectives that you derive both from the private sector and your work in state government. Also, I think it's nice to be speaking with somebody who is on the front line, so to speak, of an effort to use AI to benefit humankind in medical research. We hear a lot of skeptics and a lot of critics of AI, but I think it's also important for us to develop this more balanced and holistic approach to the topic, which I think, Michael, you've helped us foster. So we appreciate your time on the AI Forum podcast.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, Michael Cockrill, for joining us on the Responsible AI podcast from the AI Forum. You can subscribe to the Responsible AI podcast on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, or wherever you like to listen. See what we've been reading about the legal and ethical implications of AI on our website, theaiforum.org.